And without further ado, I want to get us started because it's a real pleasure to have over from the Atlantic here with us today, Karan Bhatia, who is the global head of government affairs and public policy at Google, and also, most importantly to me, a member of SIPA's advisory group, the International Leadership Council. Karan, we have to come over to Brussels to actually see each other, but welcome. Please join me and take a seat on the stage. So, Karan, great to see you.
You too, Alina.
I know this is not your first stop in Europe. You have been making a bit of a tour. And you and I were just chatting about some of the elephants in the room, so to say, that I think we are encountering on our trips to Europe as those coming from the United States. So, let's get to it.
Put an elephant out there, right?
So, I think the big elephant in the room, honestly, tends to be trust now, right? I was alluding in my comments to the upheavals we have in the transatlantic relationship, and that this is one of those moments. And coming to Europe quite regularly from the US, I think we often hear a common question, and that question is the United States a reliable partner? And not just the United States government, but US companies.
Yep.
And Google is obviously a prominent US company. And so my first question to you is Google a reliable service provider in Europe?
I can give you a one-word answer, yes. How's that?
I thought you might say that, but tell us more.
But let me first of all, let me start by saying it's great to be here in Brussels with SIPA. You are leading a terrific organization, Alina, and your leadership and the growing presence here in Brussels to complement what you do in DC is fantastic. So thrilled to be here. Look, you're right. I mean, having just spent a few days touring different member state capitals, trust is a recurring theme of what we hear. And I think your comments at the beginning are spot on, which is that, this is a relationship that I've been involved in and watching, participating in for 25 years, and it has highs and it has lows, and we're certainly going through a challenging period right now. But look, the reality is, I think trust is not something. It is earned and needs to be demonstrated every day. And frankly, we've felt, I think, the need to demonstrate that we are a trustworthy company in Europe since our inception, since our founding. We've been in Europe pretty much since our founding. We were about a 27-year-old company. I think we've been in Europe for 25 of those 27 years with physical presence here. But I think it starts with, how do you show up in Europe? And what we have done is invested in a bunch of different ways in Europe that I think hopefully demonstrate our commitment and our trust to the continent. Investments including billions of dollars into the physical infrastructure that enables the internet to operate in Europe, data centers, subsea cables. There's just been, repeated votes of confidence that we've made through our dollars here. Partnerships, it is growing partnerships with big, trusted European companies. So today we go to market, certainly on our commercial side of our business, in partnership with great European companies like TIM in Italy, like T-Systems, and now the Schwarz Group in Germany. So we are constantly looking for ways to sort of grow our connectivity into the European ecosystem. And that continues with the work that we do with entrepreneurs. It's the work that we're doing with small businesses every day, startups. We are thrilled to have invested in more than today, what are 500 startups that are viable, growing businesses, hiring people, and sometimes becoming, they're people who've started in Google and migrated out, companies like Mistral, for instance, in France. And then the last thing that I would flag is training and skilling and the work that we need to do every day and love doing every day helping raise the understanding and the skill level of average Europeans through the programs that we operate. And particularly now in this moment of artificial intelligence, where I think everybody is a little concerned about what does this mean for my job? What does this mean for our economy? Investing in European programs that skill people for that economy, I think, is absolutely critical. And then the last thing I will just say is, notwithstanding all of this, which hopefully builds trust. And by the way, I don't mean to suggest Google's the only company. I mean, there are many companies, many sectors, I suspect, in this room will have similar stories. But I do think that there are things that one needs to do to address the particular challenge of the moment. And we, for a while, had heard concerns about digital sovereignty in Europe, about the need for companies and in particular governments to feel like they can control their data if it is placed with a US hyperscaler. Mm-hmm. And to that end, our view is, yes, we agree with you. And we agree that you should be able to exercise that right if you want to. And so we offer all of our customers here a level of control over their data that we think is industry leading. It involves everything from the ability to locate physical data here physically on our servers in Europe, to having encryption keys over the data that means it cannot be disclosed without the company wanting to do so. So we think that's a critical piece of digital sovereignty. So too, by the way, is security. You need to make sure that your sovereignty doesn't mean a lot if there's not best-in-class security. And then the last thing that I'll just flag is choice. We think giving customers the ability to move their data, to transport their data from company to company if they want to, is absolutely critical as well. So we've signed up to all of those commitments.
So thanks for outlining all that, Karan. I think you put a lot on the table. Just to pick up on a couple of things you mentioned, I mean, what really jumped out at me is, when we're talking about this question of trust and reliability between Europe and the United States and between American companies and European companies, partnerships are the key there. And I think we have and could have a similar conversation when it comes to the defense sector too. Yep. That's also where we can build greater trust. The more integration we have in industry, the better prepared and the more resilient we will be as an alliance to ensure that we have mutually cooperative relationships and that we are both investing from both sides. And I think people often underestimate, in all these conversations about Europe needing to do more, to invest more, to jumpstart its competitiveness, to jumpstart its innovative edge. But people forget how many Europeans have actually contributed to some of the foundational developments, inventions that have driven so much of the growth of the global tech sector and also the American tech sector. And I think we would be very wise to remember that. You also mentioned ecosystems and how investment in a sector actually ends up creating whole ecosystems of companies from small to medium to large. And I think these are the kinds of things we should be talking about, thinking about, how can Europe continue to attract investment from the United States and hopefully a lot more from the United States to ensure that it has a thriving and dynamic economy. So on that, AI is the obvious thing that everybody wants to talk about, and you also mentioned it. But I find that we've moved on into a more thoughtful conversation on AI in our last couple of years, and you started to get into that a little bit. So just to follow up on that, AI is everywhere, right? Yep. We were just chatting about how we personally use or don't use AI because I'm kind of a late adopter to things, but it should not be in our day-to-day. And Google certainly is at the forefront of the AI race that's happening in the sector, that's happening globally. And it also seems like it's in all of Google products now too, right? From search that all of us use on a daily basis. But I think on a strategic level, can you talk a little bit more, the thought you started to put on the table as to where you really see specifically how AI can strengthen European competitiveness and security? Because these are the big issues on the table now.
Yeah. And we'll answer that, but just to touch on something you mentioned in the lead-in, the fact that those partnerships often involve in Europe often involve the innovation of products jointly.
Yeah.
I think we see. I mean, I won't speak for other sectors, but I'm pretty confident it's true for defense and other sectors as well. But certainly in the technology sector, I would venture to say that there's no big company, and Google certainly is an example of this, that is not literally daily, hourly co-inventing products. We have people in Munich who are doing all of our security-related work for our products globally. We have a safety center in Dublin, where literally it's seamless. So that is exactly right. Look, I think the moment we are in technologically is the most consequential moment, that I've seen and am likely to see in our lifetimes right now. I mean, AI, it's not just the depth and substance of what it's doing, but it's the speed at which this is happening and that it is being incorporated into products. And we have we're in a privileged position to sort of see it across industries, and I'm seeing it across countries, where, in Europe, it is being adopted by large companies, by large clients, to absolutely revolutionize their processes. Mm-hmm. The efficient, we're working with Bosch, for instance, 12% reduction in energy usage just by adoption of Google Cloud AI tools. The work we're doing with major airlines here that's reducing both, again, energy usage, but also allowing them to deliver better, faster services to customers. So it's sector after sector, we're seeing this happening. And the science areas, and the work that it's going to enable for Europe to be at the forefront on science, on drug discovery, is extraordinary. So we're seeing a lot happening in that space. Now, I will one further point. When you think about Europe's challenges over the course of the last X number of years, and I think Mario Draghi put his finger right on this, if not the biggest, certainly one of the biggest challenges has been the productivity challenge, right? And that is the product of multiple things. It's demographics. You can talk about regulation and so forth, but AI is like manna from heaven if you have a productivity challenge. And we're seeing it be thought of and seen and addressed in that regard. So I think our thought about AI is going to be beneficial, we think, and create incredible opportunities for people everywhere around the world. But I would offer there may be no region where if you see real adoption of AI, deep adoption of AI, it's going to have a more profound beneficial impact than Europe. So you would say to yourself, boy, given that, what are we seeing? I mean, hopefully we are seeing Europe at the forefront of adoption. And there, the story, frankly, is a little more mixed. There has been good adoption of artificial intelligence by the biggest companies in Europe.
Right.
But in two spaces, you're seeing much weaker adoption. You're not seeing it by the small, medium-sized enterprises that constitute such a big chunk of the European economy. And you are not seeing it by governments themselves. And there's a lot of discussion as to why you're not seeing the SMB adoption. And I think it may, in fact, be traced to the fact that you're not seeing it by governments as much as well. But when you look at the numbers, for instance, China, I'll give you China, 50 to 80% of Chinese companies are incorporating generative AI products into their daily work streams. The number in Europe for all companies is 13%.
Wow.
And the numbers get substantially smaller when you're talking about small and medium-sized enterprises. If you want to look at total spend on AI-related products, in Europe, it's somewhere between 40, depending on the market, 40 and 75% lower in Europe than it is in the United States. So Europe, from my vantage point, this is the existential challenge that Europe needs to confront over the course of the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Those are some stark numbers that you just put out there. I mean, this graphics galore, if you do a quick search, to see the imbalance in the investment certainly between Europe and the United States. There's a little less information on China, but I think you would see the numbers you mentioned repeated all kinds of ways across the board. I think you're right, this is the big challenge. And I think often companies look for signals from governments.
Yes.
Whether they should start implementing, integrating new technologies and they're not getting those signals, then we're going to see a lag. Of course, as an institution that wants to see Europe and the United States on a balanced footing, I think the concern that I have had and many of us have had at CEPA has been this notion that, in 5 years, if we keep going on this path where Europe doesn't do what it needs to do, hopefully Europe will, the United States keeps running forward at rapid pace, as we do, with huge investments, then 5 years, that gap is going to be too big.
Yeah.
And we don't want to see that. I don't think anybody here wants to see that. So I think the question is always, how do we jumpstart that investment? And so one of the answers to that, I think, also lies in the regulatory space, which you alluded to. So let me just ask you that as kind of my last question, because, obviously Europe has emerged and has been the global regulator when it comes to all kinds of things, but technology being the prominent one. And the AI Act has been under debate. Obviously, it is law, but I think we've been hearing some conversations recently about whether that legislation is actually going to serve the European interest of jumpstarting competitiveness and innovation. So what's your take on the current efforts to try to simplify, as the European term goes, or maybe even deregulate some of the AI particular legislation that we've seen come about?
Well, first of all, let me say I completely agree that the path forward for Europe to catch up and get ahead starts with governments. I very much agree with that. I think, and as we said, as as I mentioned, and you alluded to, I think it starts with governments adopting the technology in their own day-to-day activities, and leaving aside the signal that sends of confidence and trust that sends to the rest of the economy, which I think is very palpable. It makes sense for governments themselves, right? We did a study, I don't know whether it was our study or somebody else's, but 100 billion euros a year could be saved by governments just by incorporating AI into their processes. Better services, lower cost, faster production, more secure. So anyway, the first point I would say is governments need to drive this forward, and they need to be vocal about it, right? I would love every European member state government to have an active AI plan and a strategy, and to be pushing them. Yeah. So point number one. To the point about regulation, yes, absolutely. Look, I mean, I'm not going to be making any great news by saying that the regulatory environment in Europe on technology has been one where we've seen more and more regulation come at the sector, and not just the big companies, not just the hyperscalers, many different levels of the industry. From our vantage point, at a very high level, I think there are a few things that need to be done. We need simplification, right? At a macro level, these regulations need to be able to be applied in a way where you're not looking product by product by product and having to tweak each one. Setting some general rules and allowing companies to figure out how do they meet those standards, I think, is got to be part of the approach. The second is scalability, right? It is, it's very appealing to sort of think about setting a set of rules for big companies and exempting out SMEs. But the reality of what that does is it just limits the ability of companies to scale, right? They'll get up to a certain point, and then it'll be, oh my goodness, if I grow by another employee or two, this whole new set of things. So that's number two. And then finally, number three is harmonization. I mean, we're seeing just a this proliferation of regulations at both the member state level and at the EU level is really leading to sort of increasing tension and conflict and sometimes inconsistent signals. So I would say at a macro level, that's what I would urge done. I think the AI Act and how it gets evolved into this AI code is going to be super important. Right. And we're spending a lot of time thinking about that. And then the last thing, and I'll end on this note, that I think the European, both governments, Commission, et cetera, need to do, and quite frankly, we in the private sector and the United States needs to do, and it comes back to the point you started with, which is really think about things through a partnership lens, right? There is probably only one country in the world, and it is not either in Europe nor the United States, that can do AI alone. And so if the United States and Europe are going to be at the forefront of artificial intelligence and what it offers and what it presents, it is going to have to take the best of both.
Exactly.
And that is everything from model training, compute capabilities, people, application development, and it's going to need to work together.
Yeah. More interdependence, more integration, not less. I think that's the answer to independence from China for all of us. And I think here you're right. That's the note to end on, is that Europe needs the U.S. and the U.S. needs Europe, and that's just the reality we have to live in this marriage, right?
Exactly.
No matter how many fights we have in between.
Yeah.
Karan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here. I know you have a busy agenda, but thank you for this interesting conversation as always. And everyone, please join me in thanking Karan Bhatia at Google. Thanks so much.